The wind over Boston that Christmas Eve cut sharper than glass, slicing through Daniel Moore's thin paramedic jacket as he trudged home from his final shift. The streets were empty, dressed in silver snow and silence. He wanted only warmth, maybe a leftover slice of his mother's pie and a few hours of sleep. But fate doesn't knock softly, it cries. From a narrow alley came a muffled sob, the kind that freezes your heart before your feet even move. Daniel stopped breath, turning white in the air. Who would be out there on a night like this? When he stepped closer, what he saw would change his life forever. Before I tell you what Daniel found, imagine this two small figures huddled against a brick wall, barefoot in the snow, their hands locked together as if the world would vanish if they let go. Would you walk past, or would you stop? Tell me in the comments what you'd do, because what Daniel did that night will shock you. And wait until you see what he discovered just hours later. The alley smelled of frost and old garbage, dimly lit by a flickering streetlight. "Hey there," Daniel called softly, the tone he used for frightened patients. The smaller shape flinched. "It's okay," he added, kneeling, palms open. "I'm not gonna hurt you." Out of the shadows, two identical faces appeared, twin girls. Maybe 6, hair-tangled eyes, too blue and too scared for a child. One clutched a broken doll. The other's lips trembled so hard she could barely speak. "We're cold," she whispered. Daniel swallowed hard. He'd seen addicts, drunks, runaways, but never children like this. "Where are your parents?" he asked. The braver twin lifted her chin. "Mom went to get food. She said she'd come back." The pause that followed was heavier than the falling snow. "She didn't come back." He looked at them, tiny bones wrapped in rags, and every rule he'd ever followed as a paramedic clashed with the ache in his chest. The proper thing was to call child services, wait for the police. But it was Christmas Eve, the temperature dropping toward death. And behind him the city lights glittered indifferently, as if humanity had gone to sleep. He couldn't leave them there. Not tonight. "Come on," he said quietly. "I live a few blocks away. It's warm. My mom's got soup." The girls hesitated, fear written across their pale faces. "You don't have to be scared," he added, extending his hands. "You're safe with me." After a long, fragile moment, the taller one took his hand. The other followed, clutching her sister's coat sleeve. Together, they stepped into the streetlight, 3 shadows merging into one. Snow crunched under their feet as they walked through the silent neighborhoods of South Boston. Houses glowed with Christmas lights, and laughter leaked through windows, a cruel contrast to the shivering silence beside him. Daniel glanced down. The girls were so light he could have carried both. "What are your names?" he asked. Ella said the older. Lila whispered the other. "Pretty names," he smiled. "You can call me Dan." The girls didn't smile back, but their grip on his hands tightened. When he reached his small brick house, the porch light flickered like a tired heartbeat. Inside, his mother, Grace, waited frail and coughing, wrapped in her old quilt by the fire. "Danny," her voice trembled. "That you? Yeah, Mom," he answered, his heart pounding. "And I brought company." He opened the door wider. Grace's eyes widened as the cold air swept in, revealing the 2 little girls behind him. "Oh, dear Lord," she breathed, reaching for her cane. "Who are they?" "Found them in an alley," Daniel said softly. "No parents, no shoes. They were freezing." Grace didn't ask another question. She simply motioned for them to come in. "Close the door, Daniel," she said firmly. "We'll sort it out later." The moment they stepped inside, warmth wrapped around them like mercy. Grace knelt painfully, pulling the girls toward the fire. "You poor angels," she murmured, brushing snow from their hair. "You're safe now." The twins' eyes flickered with confusion, then relief. When Grace handed them mugs of cocoa, their tiny hands shook not from cold but disbelief. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching his mother's frail body bent over those children, the glow of the fire turning her silver hair to gold. For months she had been fighting heart problems, exhaustion, the kind of quiet surrender that comes from too many lonely nights. But now her cheeks flushed with color. She laughed softly when Ella spilled cocoa on her sleeve. It was a laugh Daniel hadn't heard in years. He went to the kitchen, heating leftover soup, mind spinning. What was he doing? Bringing home strangers, two abandoned children, when his mother could barely walk some days. Yet deep down, something told him this wasn't chance. Maybe it was Grace itself disguised as two frightened little girls. Later that night, after the girls had fallen asleep under extra blankets on the couch, Daniel checked on his mother. Grace was wide awake, eyes shining. "Daniel," she whispered, "you did right tonight." He tried to smile. "It's just for tonight, Mom. I'll call social services in the morning." But Grace shook her head gently. "Maybe. Or maybe this is the reason I've been holding on." Outside, snow continued to fall, quiet and relentless. Daniel turned off the lights and sat in the dark, listening to the fire crackle and the faint breathing of the two children who had somehow stumbled into their lives. He didn't know it yet, but before sunrise something would happen that no one could explain, something that would make him question everything he thought he knew about miracles. Morning light slid through the thin curtains of Daniel's small house, casting soft gold across the worn wooden floor. The world outside was still blanketed in snow, quiet and new. Inside, however, something had shifted. The air felt lighter, warmer, not because of the fire, but because of the laughter echoing softly from the living room. Daniel paused in the hallway, still in his scrubs, unsure if he was dreaming. For the first time in years, his home didn't sound like sickness. It sounded like life. Grace sat by the fireplace, her frail frame wrapped in her favorite quilt. The twins, Ella and Lila, sat cross-legged on the floor, their tangled hair brushed into neat braids. They were dressed in Daniel's old t-shirts hanging loose like tiny dresses. Grace was telling them a story about the Christmas she met their late grandfather, a story Daniel had heard 100 times but hadn't heard her tell since before her heart began to fail. "You know what he gave me for our first Christmas?" Grace asked, eyes sparkling. "Not jewelry, not flowers, a loaf of bread." He said, "You can't eat gold, Gracie, but you can eat this." The girls giggled, and the sound filled every quiet corner of the house. Daniel leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, watching. His mother's cheeks glowed pink. Her eyes danced. For months she had been pale and distant, her life reduced to medications and silence. Yet now she looked alive. The girls had brought something into this home that medicine never could. Grace noticed him and smiled. "You didn't tell me our guests were angels. They looked a lot less angelic last night," Daniel said gently, stepping inside. "But they're cleaned up now, thanks to you." "Children just need warmth," Grace replied, reaching for Ella's hand. "Warmth and a place to belong." Daniel didn't answer. He was torn between duty and instinct. Every part of his training screamed that this was temporary, that keeping the girls longer than a night could get him into trouble. But then Lila turned and looked at him with sleepy gratitude in her eyes, and the thought of calling social services felt like betrayal. At breakfast, the kitchen came alive again. The smell of butter and cinnamon filled the air as Grace insisted on making pancakes for her girls. Ella and Lila sat at the table wide-eyed, watching her flip each one with shaky but determined hands. "I haven't made breakfast for anyone in ages," Grace said, her voice trembling with joy. This old house was getting tired of waiting for laughter. Daniel poured syrup, smiling despite himself. "Don't wear yourself out, Mom. I feel fine," she replied. "Better than fine," and she meant it. Her laughter came easy now, unforced, as if years of loneliness were melting away. After breakfast, Daniel helped the girls hang their wet coats by the heater. He noticed how tiny their shoes were, how the soles had holes worn clean through. "We'll get you new ones," he said without thinking. Lila looked up, startled. "You mean, we can stay?" Daniel froze. Grace turned from the sink, her expression soft but firm. "Of course you can," she said, "at least until we figure things out." That afternoon, Daniel took them to a nearby thrift shop. The shop owner, an older man who knew Daniel from the ambulance runs, raised his brows when he saw the twins. "Family?" he asked. Daniel hesitated. "For now," he said. The girls darted between racks, laughing as they tried on scarves and mittens. It was such an ordinary scene, so achingly normal that Daniel felt his throat tighten. Back home, Grace was waiting with hot cocoa and a box of old ornaments. If they're staying through Christmas, she said they'll need to help decorate. The girls' eyes widened at the dusty box of glittering shapes. "We never had a tree," Ella whispered. "Mom said they were expensive." Grace's heart seemed to crack at that. "Well, she said this one's already paid for." As evening fell, the house glowed with soft yellow light. Daniel untangled the string of bulbs, Grace hummed carols under her breath, and the girls hung ornaments with the careful precision of surgeons. A glass angel slipped from Lila's hands and shattered, and she burst into tears. Grace was beside her instantly, kneeling, despite her bad knees. "Hush now, darling," she whispered. "Angels don't mind a few broken wings." When the tree was finally done, they all stepped back. It wasn't perfect, the lights were uneven, the garland sagged, but it was beautiful. For the first time in years, the Moore house didn't feel like a place waiting for something to end. It felt like a beginning. Later that night, Daniel sat alone by the fire, a mug of coffee in his hands. The twins were asleep again, tucked under quilts in the guest room. Grace rested in her chair, eyes closed but peaceful. The glow of the tree reflected in the window, casting soft halos on the snow outside. He thought about the girls' small hands, their quiet thank yous, their hunger for safety. He knew what would happen if he called the authorities. The girls would be placed in the system, shuffled between strangers and shelters, their fragile trust shattered. Maybe someone would care for them properly, but maybe not. And if he didn't call, he'd be risking everything: his job, his license, even his mother's fragile health. Yet, as he watched Grace sleep, color returning to her cheeks, Daniel realized something he hadn't felt in years: peace. Sometimes rules saved lives. Other times breaking them did. Outside, a new snow began to fall, slow, steady, gentle. It coated the streetlights and softened the edges of the world. Daniel stood at the window, whispering to no one in particular. Maybe this house just found its heart again. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight it was enough. The warmth, the laughter, the fragile miracle breathing softly down the hall. This was home. By the time the holidays ended, the Moore house had settled into a rhythm Daniel hadn't known in years. Mornings smelled of coffee and toast, instead of medicine, and laughter echoed through rooms once filled with silence. Grace seemed stronger every day. She walked farther, laughed louder, and had even started baking again. Yet, beneath the glow of that newfound peace, Daniel felt the unease of a man standing on borrowed time. He knew this couldn't last forever. 2 children didn't just vanish without the world noticing. And one night, as snow tapped against his office window, curiosity finally outweighed fear. He sat at his computer, the house quiet, except for the steady breathing of the twins down the hall. Typing felt wrong, like trespassing, but he couldn't ignore the questions that gnawed at him. He searched local reports: missing twin girls, child neglect, abandonment. Dozens of stories appeared, but one headline froze him: "Alcoholic mother loses custody of twin daughters, case under review." The photo was grainy, but there was no mistaking those faces. Ella and Lila. His chest tightened as he read the details. A mother named Monica Hayes, a long history of substance abuse, neighbors reporting cries at night, children left alone for days. He leaned back, rubbing his face. Anger rose first at the woman who had done this, at the system that failed to stop it. But what came next was compassion, the kind that hurt. Addiction destroyed more than it consumed. It left ashes where love once lived. Still, it didn't erase responsibility. Someone had to protect those girls. Daniel Grace's voice came softly from the doorway. She stood in her robe, hair silver and untamed. "You're still up." He turned the monitor so she could see. Her face tightened as she read. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered. "Those poor babies." "They're safe now," Daniel said quietly. "For how long?" she asked, sitting beside him. "You know they'll come looking, the state, maybe even the mother." Daniel nodded. "I know." He reached for her hand. "Oh, but I'm not letting them go without a fight." 2 days later, the doorbell rang. Grace was folding laundry, the girls in the living room coloring, when Daniel opened the door to find a woman in a gray coat, clipboard in hand. "Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Carter with Child Protective Services," she said. Her tone was polite but firm, the kind that carried both authority and understanding. "We received a report about 2 minors possibly residing here." For a moment, Daniel couldn't speak. His throat went dry. Grace appeared behind him, her expression calm but guarded. "Please, come in," she said gently. Rebecca stepped inside, her sharp eyes softening as she spotted the twins on the floor. "Hello, girls," she said with a practiced warmth. Ella and Lila froze, fear flashing in their eyes. Grace knelt beside them, whispering, "It's all right, sweethearts. She just wants to talk." In the kitchen, Rebecca listened as Daniel explained everything, how he'd found them, why he couldn't leave them out there. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. She took notes without interrupting, then looked up. "Mr. Moore, I believe your intentions were good, but taking children without notifying the authorities is serious. We have to follow procedure, I understand," he said. "But it was Christmas Eve. They would have frozen to death." Rebecca sighed, closing her folder. "You're not wrong, and I can see they're being well cared for." She glanced toward the living room where Grace was teaching Lila how to fold paper stars. "For now, I'll recommend temporary foster custody while we investigate. It means home visits, background checks, medical records, the works." Daniel exhaled, part relief, part dread. "So they can stay for now," Rebecca said, offering a small smile. "But I'll be checking in often." That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Grace sat by the fire with her knitting, while Daniel stared into the flames. "You did right," she said softly. "You didn't turn away." "I just don't know if it'll be enough," he replied. "If they send them back, then we fight." Grace interrupted. "We give them a reason to stay." The following weeks blurred into a quiet battle for normalcy. Daniel balanced hospital shifts with home inspections and endless forms. Grace became the girls' anchor, helping them catch up on schoolwork, reading bedtime stories, showing them how to bake cookies without burning them. Slowly, the girls began to open up. One snowy afternoon, while drawing at the kitchen table, Ella looked up and asked, "Are we going to have to leave again?" Daniel paused mid-sip of coffee. "Why would you think that people always say that?" She murmured, eyes fixed on the paper. "That we can stay, but then they send us away." He crouched beside her, placing a hand over hers. "I can't promise I control everything," he said, his voice breaking a little, "but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep you safe." Lila looked up from her drawing and whispered, "Can we call you Uncle Dan?" He smiled, throat tight. "You can call me whatever you like." That night, after tucking them in, Daniel returned to his office. A notification blinked on his screen, a new message from Rebecca. It was a scanned document Monica Hayes had resurfaced requesting a case review. She was claiming sobriety and demanding to see her daughters. Daniel stared at the screen for a long time. The warmth of the house suddenly felt fragile, like glass under pressure. Grace appeared at the doorway again, reading his expression before he spoke. "It's her," he said quietly. "She's coming." Grace placed a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll face her together." Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in quiet white. Inside, Daniel watched the twins sleep unaware of the storm gathering beyond their small, safe home. The shadows of the past were rising, and this time they had a name. The knock came early, on a gray February morning, sharp and quick, cutting through the warmth of breakfast like a blade. Daniel opened the door and froze. Standing on his porch was a woman with trembling hands, a worn coat, and eyes that carried too many storms. "My name is Monica Hayes," she said, her voice breaking. "I believe my daughters are here." For a moment, Daniel couldn't breathe. He'd imagined this moment countless times, but never like this, not with her standing there sober, her gaze steady yet desperate. Grace appeared behind him holding a dish towel. Her face went pale. "Oh, dear Lord," she whispered. The twins, sitting at the kitchen table with half-eaten toast, heard the voice. Ella's fork clattered to the floor. "Mom," she whispered. Leela's small hand gripped her sister's arm. Daniel stepped outside, closing the door behind him. The cold bit into his skin. "You shouldn't just show up like this," he said quietly. "There's a process." "Social services should I couldn't wait," Monica interrupted. "You have no idea what it's like knowing your children are with strangers." Her voice cracked. "I've been sober for 4 months. I'm working again. I have a place small but safe. I just want to see them." Daniel studied her, searching for truth in her eyes. There was no makeup, no rehearsed sorrow, just exhaustion and something close to shame. "They're not ready," he said. "You can't just walk back in and expect I know what I did." Monica snapped, tears spilling over. "I know I hurt them. I'm trying to make it right." Before Daniel could reply, Grace opened the door. "Let her in, Daniel," she said softly. "The girls deserve answers." Inside, the air was thick with tension. Monica knelt slowly in front of her daughters. "Hi, my loves," she whispered. "It's me." The girls didn't move. Ella's chin trembled. "You left us," she said. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "You said you'd come back." Monica's face crumpled. "I know, baby, I know. I was sick. I didn't mean to hurt you." She reached out, but the girls flinched. Grace gently stepped forward, placing a hand on Monica's shoulder. "You need to give them time." Daniel watched from the doorway, every instinct fighting itself. He'd seen mothers like her in the ER, eyes hollow from guilt, skin thin from withdrawal words full of regret. But there was something different here. Her remorse wasn't a performance. It was raw, heavy, and real. Over the next few days, Rebecca Carter from CPS arranged official visits. The house turned tense, caught between hope and fear. The twins grew quieter, their laughter fading into whispers. Grace tried to keep the peace, but Daniel could see how much it weighed on her. She'd grown to love the girls as her own, and the thought of losing them was breaking her heart. The first supervised visit took place on a Saturday afternoon. Rebecca sat quietly in the corner while Monica played board games with her daughters at the kitchen table. Ella smiled once faintly when Monica let her win. Lila sat close to her sister, watchful, guarded. After the visit, Rebecca pulled Daniel aside. "She's doing everything right," she said. "Attending meetings, therapy, holding a job. The court tends to favor reunification when there's progress." Daniel felt the ground shift beneath him. "You think they'll take them away?" "I think," Rebecca said carefully. The judge will want to explore what's best for the children, and that includes their mother. That night, Daniel barely slept. The thought of losing the girls hollowed him out. They weren't just guests anymore. They were family. They'd rebuilt this house from a place of grief into a home full of life. Grace's health had improved. His own days had meaning again. The girls had healed here, and now it could all vanish. The court hearing came 3 weeks later, held in a small brick courthouse downtown. The twins sat beside Grace in their Sunday dresses, clutching each other's hands. Monica sat across the room, clean composed but shaking. Daniel could feel her eyes on him as the judge, a woman named Evelyn Marks, called the session to order. Rebecca spoke first, outlining the timeline the night Daniel found the girls, the months of care, Monica's recovery. When it was Daniel's turn, his voice was steady but thick with emotion. "I didn't plan to keep them," he said. "I just couldn't leave them to freeze. Over time, they became part of our family. My mother, who was bedridden, is alive again because of them. We don't want to take them from their mother, Your Honor. We just want them safe." Monica's lawyer rose next, presenting proof of her sobriety, employment, and attendance at rehab meetings. Then Monica stood, hands clasped so tightly they shook. "I don't deserve forgiveness," she began, "but I'm asking for a chance. My girls are my life. I made mistakes, terrible ones, but I'm not that person anymore." Her voice cracked. "I've been sober for 127 days. Every morning I wake up and thank God I'm still here to try again." There was silence. Then Judge Marks said gently, "Mrs. Hayes' recovery is commendable, but the question before us is stability. What environment serves the children best?" After deliberation, the judge decided on a temporary arrangement. Ella and Lila would remain with Daniel and Grace under foster guardianship, while Monica continued her treatment and weekly supervised visits. The next hearing would review permanent custody. The relief in Daniel's chest was immediate, but fragile. When Monica approached him outside the courtroom, he braced for anger. Instead, she said quietly, "Thank you for not turning them away, for keeping them safe." Her eyes filled. "You probably hate me." "I don't," he said. "I just want what's best for them." "Then we're on the same side," she whispered. Weeks passed. Each visit grew a little easier. The twins began to talk to their mother again. Small steps, stories about school drawings, songs. Grace, ever the peacemaker, encouraged it. "Love isn't divided, Daniel," she told her son. "It multiplies." One evening after Monica's visit, Daniel found Grace sitting by the window, staring at the snow. "She reminds me of your father," she said softly. "Flawed, but trying. Sometimes people lose their way before they learn how to love right." He nodded slowly. "Do you think she can really change?" Grace smiled faintly. "I think she already has." That night, as the house settled into sleep, Daniel checked on the twins. They were curled together beneath their blankets, safe and peaceful. He turned off the lamp and paused at the doorway, thinking of Monica walking back alone through the snow, clutching her recovery coin like a promise. The path ahead was uncertain. Legal battles, therapy, the fragile hope of forgiveness. But for the first time, he believed it might lead somewhere good. The Moore house, once a shelter for strangers, had become something more. A refuge for the broken. A place where lost souls found their way back to the light. And for Daniel, who had once stopped for a sound in the dark, it was proof that sometimes compassion wasn't just an act, it was the beginning of redemption. Christmas morning dawned bright and crisp, the sun casting a pale light across the snow-covered streets of Boston. Inside the Moore house, the air was thick with the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee, filling every corner with a warmth that felt as though it could hold the world together. The tree in the corner, now fully adorned, glittered softly, each ornament placed by Ella and Lila with careful hands, their small faces lighting up every time they added a new decoration. The house, once a place of quiet sorrow, now felt alive with energy and possibility. Grace sat in her chair by the window, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea, watching as the twins hung the last few ornaments. Daniel stood beside her, his eyes soft as he observed the girls, their laughter floating in the air like music. For the first time in what felt like years, the house didn't just feel like a home, it was home. "You know," Grace said, her voice filled with the gentle wisdom that came with age sometimes, "the best gifts come when we least expect them. Not just in the wrapping, but in the heart of it all." She looked at Daniel, her eyes warm, full of the love that had blossomed between them in the months since the twins arrived. "These two little ones, they've given us more than we could ever give them." Daniel smiled, his gaze shifting to the twins, who were now engaged in a fierce but friendly competition to see who could place the final star atop the tree. Ella, always the more determined of the two, stood on tiptoe trying to reach, while Lila giggled and held her steady. "It's like we're making up for lost time, isn't it?" Daniel said quietly, almost to himself. "What we thought was missing. Maybe it was just waiting for us to see it." The conversation fell into a comfortable silence as Grace sipped her tea. Daniel's mind wandered, thinking back to all the choices he'd made, the doubts that had kept him awake at night. But when he looked at the girls, Ella and Lila, their faces bright and full of the kind of joy that only a child could bring, he knew that he'd done the right thing. No matter how hard the road had been, this was where they belonged. Later that afternoon, there was another knock at the door. This time, Daniel was more prepared. He opened the door slowly and saw Monica standing there, a hesitant smile on her face, dressed warmly against the cold. Her eyes, once full of anger and regret, were now filled with something softer, something that resembled hope. "I didn't want to just show up again," she said, almost apologetically, "but I brought something for the girls. I didn't know if it was too much, but I wanted to give them something they could call their own." She held out a small wrapped package, the corners of it carefully folded. Daniel looked back at the girls who were peeking out from the kitchen, watching the scene unfold. He stepped aside, motioning for Monica to come in. "It's all right," he said. "They'll want to see you." Monica stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room, taking in the warmth, the decorations, the life that had filled the house since she left. Ella and Lila hesitated for a moment, but the pull of their mother was undeniable. Slowly, they walked toward her, still unsure but drawn to her presence. "I didn't forget about you," Monica said softly as she kneeled down, holding out the gift. "I've been working hard to make things right, for you, for both of you." Ella took the gift first, her fingers trembling. Lila followed suit, clutching her sister's arm. "We've been thinking about you," Lila said, her voice quiet but steady. "We missed you." Monica's breath caught, and for a moment, Daniel wasn't sure if she would be able to speak. Her face softened, the wall she'd built over the years, crumbling under the weight of her daughter's forgiveness. "I missed you too," she whispered, eyes glistening. "I'm so sorry." Grace stepped forward, placing a hand on Monica's shoulder. "Forgiveness isn't something you can rush," she said, "but it's something that's earned, and I see you're trying." The room grew quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the heater. It wasn't the dramatic reunion one might expect, but something deeper, real. Monica wasn't asking for forgiveness, she was showing it in the only way she knew how. Daniel stood back, watching the scene unfold. He didn't know what the future held. The legal battles were far from over, and the girl's future still hung in the balance. But for the first time since all of this began, he felt at peace. The family he had built wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. They were flawed and healing, and that made them whole. Monica didn't stay long. After a few hours, she kissed the girls goodbye, promising to keep working on herself to prove that she was worthy of their trust. As she left, Daniel and Grace stood in the doorway watching her go, wondering where this road would lead. But for the first time, there was no anger in their hearts, only the hope that one day this broken family could find its way back together. Later that night, as the house settled into a peaceful quiet, Daniel tucked the girls into bed, their eyes fluttering as they drifted off to sleep, their small hands clasped together. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching them, feeling the weight of all that had passed and all that was yet to come. Grace joined him, her arm around his shoulders. "You've done good, Daniel," she said softly. "You've given them something they've never had before. A home." Daniel smiled, his heart full. "We've all given something, Mom. This isn't just about me. It's about us. Together." As he turned to leave the room, he glanced at the tree, at the handmade ornaments, the star shining brightly at the top. It wasn't just a Christmas tree anymore. It was a symbol of their journey, of everything they had overcome and everything they still had to fight for. The next morning, Christmas morning, Daniel awoke to the sound of the girls laughing in the living room. He could hear Grace humming along to an old Christmas carol and the smell of fresh coffee wafting from the kitchen. For the first time in his life, Daniel didn't feel lost. He was home. And for the first time in a long while, he believed that no matter what came next, they would face it together. With love, with patience, and with the strength that only a family, no matter how unconventional, could provide. In the end, the story of Daniel Moore, his mother Grace, and the twin girls Ella and Lila wasn't just a tale about chance. It was a story about the quiet miracles that begin when compassion replaces hesitation. What started as a single act of kindness on a freezing Christmas Eve became the turning point in several broken lives. Daniel, a man who had almost given up on finding meaning in his long, exhausting days at the hospital, discovered that love can arrive in unexpected forms, sometimes in the shape of two frightened little girls huddled in the cold. Grace, once frail and fading, found her strength again, not through medicine but through purpose. And Monica Hayes, a mother lost to her own pain, began the long, painful climb toward redemption. Their paths collided by fate, but what bound them together was choice, the choice to stay, to fight, and to forgive. Through every tear, every legal hearing, every sleepless night filled with doubt, the Moore family proved that blood is not the only thing that makes a family. It's courage, it's sacrifice, and it's the willingness to see goodness even in those who have fallen the hardest. By the time another Christmas came around, the Moore household had changed forever. Grace's laughter filled the halls again. Daniel's heart, once burdened by guilt and exhaustion, had learned to open. And the twins, once abandoned and afraid, now had a home where love wasn't conditional and safety wasn't temporary. Even Monica, standing at the edge of their new beginning, had found a place in that fragile circle of trust. Forgiveness didn't erase her past, but it gave her a reason to keep walking toward a better future. This story reminds us that redemption isn't found in grand gestures. It's found in the small, difficult moments when we choose to care despite our fear. It's in the way we show up for others, in the patience to listen, and in the courage to forgive. Sometimes the world changes not because of those with power or wealth, but because an ordinary person decides to stop to help and to believe that love still matters. In a world often driven by self-interest and division, Daniel's story teaches us something simple yet profound, that one act of compassion can ripple outward, healing not just others but ourselves. It tells us that family isn't only about shared names, it's about shared hearts. And it reminds us that the true spirit of Christmas and of humanity itself lies in our ability to give when it's inconvenient, to love when it's difficult, and to forgive when it seems impossible. So, as you finish listening to this story, take a moment to reflect who in your life needs a second chance. Who have you walked past without seeing? Maybe the miracle you're waiting for is waiting on the other side of your kindness. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that compassion still has the power to change lives, please take a second to subscribe to our channel. Every like, comment, and share helps us continue creating heartfelt stories that celebrate the goodness still left in this world. Your support gives us the strength to bring more tales of hope, courage, and redemption to life. Because at the end of the day, the world doesn't need more noise, it needs more stories like this. Stories that remind us we're never too late to start again, to forgive and to love. So, stay with us and let's keep believing in the power of kindness, one story at a time.